The letter was rain-damaged. That was what drew his hand to it. Nathaniel Sterling, 6th Duke of Halford, stood in the gravel yard behind the old posting inn at 10M Cross, watching his coachman argue with a farrier over a thrown shoe when the wind delivered it. Not dramatically, not like some omen from a Gothic novel his sister devoured by candlelight. The folded paper simply tumbled along the ground with a scattering of dead leaves, pressed itself flat against his boot, and stayed. He picked it up because it was there. The ink had bled in places, violet trails weeping down the page where water had found it. But enough remained, enough to read. He should not have read it. That understanding settled in him immediately, the way good breeding settles, automatically, without heat. A gentleman does not read another's correspondence. Yet the first line held him before the principle could take hold. I have decided that loneliness has a sound, and it is the particular creak of a floorboard when no one is coming. He read it standing in the yard, his greatcoat collar turned up against a March wind that could not decide between winter and something kinder. The letter was written in a hand that was careful but not practiced, the penmanship of someone who had been taught well and then given no occasion to refine the teaching. Certain letters leaned too far forward, others stood perfectly upright, as though remembering a governess's ruler. It was addressed to no one. That struck him. He turned the page over. No direction, no name, no seal. Only the writing, covering both sides in tight, economical lines. Whoever had written this understood the cost of paper. You will think me foolish for writing when I have no one to send this to. Perhaps I am foolish. But I have found that if I do not put the words somewhere outside myself, they circle and circle inside my skull like wasps trapped under glass, and I cannot sleep for the buzzing. He folded it, put it in his breast pocket, told himself he would think no more about it. The shoe was repaired within the hour. His man, Jessup, drove them the remaining 9 miles to Brindley Park, where Nathaniel was expected by Saturday for the Sterling family's annual gathering, a tradition his late mother had instituted and his living relations sustained with the tenacity of barnacles clinging to a hull. He did not enjoy these gatherings. He attended them because the alternative was a volume of correspondence from his aunt, Lady Tabitha Sterling, each letter more accusatory than the last, and he had learned that surrender was more efficient than siege. Brindley Park sat broad and pale against the gray sky, its Palladian front as composed as a face that has been told not to show feeling. Nathaniel had spent 3 summers here as a boy. He remembered the lake, the folly, the avenue of elms that his uncle had planted in the Jubilee year. He did not remember the house being so quiet. A steward met him at the door. The family had not yet assembled. He was the first to arrive. His rooms were prepared. A fire had been lit. Would his grace care for tea? His grace would care for brandy, but he said tea. Alone in the east bedroom, he sat in a chair that was too small for him and removed the letter from his coat. Read it again. He did not know why. The window here faces north. I have counted the slates on the opposite roof. There are 143, and one is cracked. I watched the crack to see if it will worsen. It has not. I admire its stubbornness. I think we are alike, that slate and I. Broken in a way that does not progress, does not heal, simply persists. Something in his chest rearranged itself, not painfully, more like a drawer that had been stuck coming suddenly, softly loose. The writer was a woman, he was nearly certain. Not from the hand alone, men could write small and women could write large, but from something less definable. A quality of observation that had been sharpened on confinement. The letter described a world no bigger than a room. The window, the roof, the floorboard, a spider that had built in the corner and been permitted to stay because she is the only creature here who chose to come. There was no self-pity in it. That was what unsettled him. He had read letters of complaint, of grief, of rage. His position attracted them. Strangers wrote to dukes the way sailors wrote to God, with extravagant need and no real expectation of reply. Those letters were heavy with their own suffering. This one was not. It observed suffering the way a naturalist observed weather. Precisely, without appeal. I wonder sometimes if the people below remember I am here. I hear them at dinner. The sound rises through the boards, not words, but the rhythm of words, the rise and fall of conversation like breathing. I press my ear to the floor, not to listen, to feel the vibration. It is the closest I come to company. He set the letter on the mantelpiece, drank his tea, watched the fire, took the letter from the mantelpiece, read the passage again. The closest I come to company. The family arrived in stages over the following 2 days, like weather systems converging. First, his Aunt Tabitha, angular and certain, her voice entering rooms before she did. Then his cousin Ezra, who had recently taken orders and wore his new clerical collar with the self-consciousness of a boy in his father's shoes. Then a scattering of more distant relations, a second cousin from Shropshire, an elderly uncle who slept through meals and woke only to dispute the port. And then the Sedgwicks. Nathaniel knew of them only distantly. Sir Adam Sedgwick had been a baronet of modest holdings in the neighboring county, dead now 3 years. His widow, Lady Sedgwick, Ruth, she insisted on being called, with a warmth that never quite reached the performance of her eyes, had been invited on the strength of some connection to Nathaniel's late uncle that no one could precisely articulate, but no one had troubled to question. She arrived with 2 daughters of her own, girls of 16 and 17, who looked stamped from the same pale mold, and without the stepdaughter Nathaniel had been told existed. He noticed this absence only because Aunt Tabitha noticed everything. Was there not a girl? Tabitha said at dinner. That first evening, her fork suspended between plate and mouth. Adam's daughter, from his first wife. What was her name? Abigail. Lady Sedgwick's smile did not falter. She had a handsome face, dark-eyed, symmetrical, and she used it the way a card player uses a neutral hand, to conceal, not to express. She is unwell, I am afraid. A delicate constitution. She does not travel. Pity, Tabitha said, and ate her fish. Nathaniel might have thought nothing more of it. He was not in the habit of cataloging other families' daughters, absent or otherwise. He had his own concerns. The estate in Derbyshire, the drainage bill moving through Parliament, the perpetual question of marriage that his aunt raised with the regularity of a clock striking. He did not need a mystery. He was not looking for one. But the letter was in his breast pocket. He could feel it against his chest, thin as a breath. The next morning he walked the grounds alone, a habit so fixed that his valet no longer inquired about it. Brindley Park's gardens had been ambitious once, and were merely large now, boxwood hedges grown ragged, gravel paths surrendering to moss. He walked the perimeter, then cut through the kitchen garden, then followed the wall toward the old stable block. It was there, behind the stable block, that he found the second letter. Not delivered by wind this time. Placed, tucked into a gap between stones in the garden wall, folded tight, positioned as though left for collection, as though someone had been meant to retrieve it and had not. He should not have taken it. He knew this with even greater clarity than before, because this letter had been deliberately hidden, deliberately placed. It belonged to someone's secret. He took it anyway. The compulsion was quiet and absolute, like thirst. He did not open it until he was back in his room, door closed, chair drawn to the window where the light was strongest. It is Tuesday, I think. I lose the days sometimes. The meals help. When they come, I can count. Breakfast means morning. The tray at dusk means the day is done. But sometimes the tray does not come at dusk, and then the hours stretch and lose their names, and I must wait for the light to tell me what the silence will not. His hand tightened on the page. When the tray does not come, not when the tray is late, when it does not come. He read on. I have begun to ration the candles. There were 6 when last she permitted the maid to bring a box. I have 4 remaining. I burn them only to write, and I write less than I wish to, which means there are things inside me that will remain unwritten, and I feel them pressing at the walls of my ribs like birds in a cage that has been covered with cloth. They do not know it is dark on purpose. They think the night is real. He sat with this for a long time. The careful mind that had been educated at Eton and refined at Cambridge, the mind that read parliamentary reports and assessed land yields and understood the precise mechanics of social obligation. That mind began to arrange facts the way a mason arranges stones, testing each for fit. A stepdaughter who did not travel, a woman who counted meals to know the days, letters hidden in a wall with no one to receive them, a window that faced north, overlooking a roof of 143 slates. He went to the window of his own room and looked out across the rear of the house. The east wing rose above the stable yard, and above the east wing, set back from the main roof line, were the dormer windows of the attic story. Small windows, narrow. One of them faced north. From where he stood, he could count the slates on the opposite roof. He did not count them. He did not need to. He put the letter with its companion in the drawer beside his bed, and when the gong sounded for luncheon, he went downstairs and sat opposite Lady Ruth Sedgwick and studied her the way he had not studied anyone in years. She was attentive, charming even. She laughed at Ezra's stumbling attempts at wit. She deferred to Aunt Tabitha with exactly the right degree of humility. Her own daughters sat on either side of her like bookends, pretty and silent and trained. Nathaniel watched her hands. They were steady. "Lady Sedgwick," he said, during a pause in which the table had briefly fallen to the sounds of cutlery and chewing, "your stepdaughter's illness, is it a long-standing condition?" The steadiness held. "She has always been fragile, Your Grace. Her mother was the same, a nervous temperament." "Has she been seen by a physician?" Something shifted behind Ruth's eyes. Not alarm. She was too controlled for alarm. Something closer to measurement. She was calculating what his question cost her. "Our family doctor attends her regularly. He recommends rest and seclusion. Stimulation worsens the condition, he says." "Rest and seclusion," Nathaniel repeated. "Indeed." She smiled. The smile was a closed door. He returned it with a smile of his own, the one he used in parliamentary committees when a minister was lying and they both knew it, but the game required that no one say so. Then he turned to Ezra and asked about the parish, and the conversation moved on, and Lady Sedgwick's hands remained perfectly steady. That night he could not sleep. He lay in the too-soft bed and listened to the house settle around him, its old timbers speaking their ancient, aimless language. And he thought about the woman who pressed her ear to the floor to feel the vibration of voices she could not join. He thought about the birds in the covered cage who believed the imposed darkness was real night. And he thought about the fact that Brindley Park was 9 miles from Tenham Cross, where the first letter had been found tumbling across the yard of a posting inn, which meant someone had carried it from this house. Someone had taken it from the wall and begun to deliver it and failed, or changed their mind, or been prevented. The letter had been trying to escape. He sat up in the dark. The house was silent. He was not, by nature, a man of impulse. His reputation rested on the opposite: deliberation, propriety, the careful exercise of enormous privilege. He had inherited the dukedom at 22 and had spent the 9 years since learning that power unexercised was merely decoration, and power exercised carelessly was a species of violence. He moved slowly. He was certain before he acted. He was not certain now. He was something else entirely. He lit a candle and went to the drawer and took out both letters and read them again, side by side, looking for what he had missed. The first letter, the one the wind had given him, was longer. It contained a passage he had not fully absorbed. "I used to believe that someone would come. Not a rescuer. I am not a child, and I have read enough to know that rescuers belong to stories, not to attics. But someone who would notice. Noticing is different from rescuing. A rescuer changes your circumstances. Someone who notices changes the fact that you are unseen. And to be unseen, truly unseen, for months, for years, is its own particular death. The body continues. Something else does not." He set the letters down. His hand was not steady. He observed this with distant surprise. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would find out the truth of it. Not because he was a rescuer. He had been explicitly warned against the role by the very woman who did not know he existed. But because he had noticed, and having noticed, he could not return to the condition of not having seen. The candle burned. The house breathed. Somewhere above him, separated by plaster and timber and the full weight of another woman's authority, a cracked slate held its place on a roof and did not worsen and did not heal. Morning brought rain and the particular gray light that made English country houses feel like vessels sunk to the bottom of a quiet sea. Nathaniel dressed without his valet, a preference that baffled Jessup and delighted no one, and went downstairs before the breakfast gong. The servants were already moving. He had always paid attention to servants, not from democratic principle, but from strategic habit. Power in a great house did not flow from its master. It flowed from the housekeeper, the butler, the cook. They were the hidden architecture. Learn them, and you understood the building. Brindley Park's housekeeper was a Mrs. Gibbons, wide-hipped and watchful, who had served the family since Nathaniel's uncle's time. He found her in the still-room, conducting an inventory of preserves with the grave focus of a general surveying ammunition. "Mrs. Gibbons?" She turned, curtsied. Her eyes held the particular caution that senior servants reserve for visiting aristocracy, respectful but unsurprised, as though dukes were a weather event one prepared for but did not celebrate. "Your Grace, is something not to your liking?" "Everything is perfectly comfortable. I wondered if I might ask you something." She waited, her hands, roughened and capable, folded at her waist. "The attic rooms," he said, "in the east wing, are they in use?" The pause was very brief. A less attentive man would have missed it, but Nathaniel had spent years reading the silences of men who controlled budgets and armies, and Mrs. Gibbons's silence was loud. "Storage mostly, Your Grace. Trunks, old furnishings." "Mostly." Another pause. Longer. "There is a guest in one of the upper rooms, Your Grace, a member of Lady Sedgwick's family, a young lady who requires quiet." "Quiet," he repeated. He had begun to hate the words that Lady Sedgwick and her household used. Rest, seclusion, quiet. They were the vocabulary of care, deployed as instruments of erasure. "Yes, Your Grace." Mrs. Gibbons's jaw tightened. It was not defiance. It was the expression of a woman who had opinions she could not afford. "Who carries her meals?" "Hannah, the upstairs maid. Twice daily, Your Grace. Breakfast and supper." "Twice daily." When Lady Sedgwick permits." The words cost her. He could see the price in the color that rose from her collar. "There are days when her ladyship instructs that the young lady is fasting for her health. On the physician's advice, she says." Nathaniel nodded, said nothing, let the silence do its work. Mrs. Gibbons was a woman of conscience pressed into complicity by the simple, brutal mathematics of employment. He would not punish her for it by forcing a confession. He had what he needed. "Thank you, Mrs. Gibbons. I trust this conversation will remain between us." "Of course, Your Grace." He left her among her preserves, walked the corridor toward the breakfast room, stopped at the foot of the east staircase, and looked upward. The stairs rose to the first floor, then the second, then narrowed and turned and vanished into the upper dark of the house. There was a door at the top. He could see it from where he stood. Small, plain, incongruous among Brindley Park's studied elegance. The kind of door one ceased to notice. He wanted to climb those stairs. The impulse was physical, pressing at his sternum like a fist. He did not climb them. Not yet. Not like this. If he went up now, alone, unannounced, he would be a man forcing his way into a woman's private space. However wretched that space was, however unjustly confined. She had not invited him. She did not know he existed. The letters had been written to no one, and no one did not include a duke who had read them without permission. He needed to be more careful than his anger wanted him to be. At breakfast, he sat beside Ezra and across from Lady Sedgwick's elder daughter, a girl called Leah, who had her mother's dark eyes and a habit of looking at her plate as though it might offer instructions. The younger daughter, Dinah, whispered something to her sister. Both girls glanced at Nathaniel and away. He was accustomed to being glanced at. A duke with his own teeth and a full head of dark hair, unmarried at 31, attracted glances the way a lantern attracted moths. He had learned to let them bounce off him. This morning, they irritated. Lady Sedgwick entered late, dressed in dove gray, her movements unhurried and precise. She took her seat, accepted tea, turned her attention to Aunt Tabitha with the solicitousness of a woman who understood exactly which alliances mattered in any given room. Nathaniel buttered his toast and thought about strategy. The direct approach was tempting. Confront Lady Sedgwick. Demand access to the attic. But directness required evidence beyond 2 unsigned letters and a housekeeper's reluctant admissions, and Lady Sedgwick was not a woman who would crumble under accusation. She would deny. She would produce the physician. She would perform maternal concern so convincingly that the burden of proof would shift to him, and he would become the transgressor. A duke meddling in a widow's domestic arrangements, overstepping the bounds of hospitality and propriety alike. No, he needed the girl herself. He needed to hear her. He needed her to be seen. But she was locked in an attic. And the lock was not only physical. After breakfast, he walked out despite the rain. The garden wall drew him back, the section behind the old stables where the second letter had been hidden. He examined the gap between the stones, ran his fingers into it, found nothing, then moved along the wall, testing other gaps, other crevices, and in a hollow behind a loosened capstone, 3 yards from the first hiding place, he found a third letter. This one was dry, recent, the ink sharp and unbulled. He stood in the rain and read it, water running from his hair, darkening his collar. Something has changed in the house. There are more voices than usual, more footsteps. I believe there are visitors. She will have explained my absence. She always does. The story shifts to suit the audience. Sometimes I am visiting a friend in Bath. Sometimes I am ill. Sometimes I simply do not exist. And that version, I confess, is the one that wounds most precisely, because it requires no maintenance. A lie about illness must be sustained. A lie about absence must be remembered. But the erasure of existence is effortless. One simply does not mention what is not there. He pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose. The rain was heavier now. He did not move. I have a new game. When I hear footsteps below, the visitor's footsteps, which sound different from hers, heavier, less measured, I invent the person who makes them. Today there was someone who walked slowly, with a long stride. A tall man, I think. Purposeful but unhurried. I have decided he is kind, because I need him to be, and because invention is the only freedom I have left, and I choose to use it generously. His throat closed. A tall man, purposeful but unhurried. She had heard him. Yesterday morning, when he had paced the east corridor debating whether to seek out Mrs. Gibbons, she had been above him, listening, inventing him. I have decided he is kind, because I need him to be. He folded the letter with exaggerated care, as though it were something that might shatter, and placed it inside his coat against the others. 3 letters now. 3 fragments of a woman he had never seen, whose voice he knew more intimately than those of people he had dined with for years. He was in danger. He recognized it with the clinical detachment of a man observing his own symptoms. This was no longer curiosity. It was something with roots, something growing downward into the soil of him, and he could not determine whether what was growing was compassion or something less governable. He went inside, changed his wet clothes, sat by the fire, and made a decision. That afternoon, the household gathered in the drawing room. Rain made outdoor pursuits impossible, and the company had settled into the languid purgatory of forced togetherness, card games, desultory conversation, Aunt Tabitha's commentary on everyone's posture. Nathaniel positioned himself near Lady Sedgwick and waited for the moment. It came when Tabitha began to speak of a ball. The family gathering traditionally concluded with one, a modest affair by ducal standards, but significant to the neighborhood. Invitations had been sent, musicians engaged. The topic animated the room. Even Ezra, who danced with the grace of a wardrobe being moved upstairs, showed interest. "Your daughters must attend, of course," Tabitha said to Lady Sedgwick, "and your stepdaughter, if she is well enough." Lady Sedgwick's smile was seamless. "I fear Abigail will not be equal to it. Large gatherings distress her terribly. The noise, "I should like to meet her," Nathaniel said. The room did not fall silent. It was more subtle than that, a redistribution of attention, like iron filings swinging toward a magnet. Aunt Tabitha looked at him. Ezra looked at him. Lady Sedgwick looked at him, and for the first time did not smile. "Your Grace?" "Miss Sedgwick, I knew her father slightly." This was true. He had met Sir Adam once at a hunt, years ago. The memory was thin but serviceable. "I should like to pay my respects to his daughter, if her condition permits a brief visit." He delivered this with the particular blandness that aristocratic power made possible, the tone that was not a request and was not a command, but occupied the territory between, where refusal required more courage than most people possessed. Lady Sedgwick possessed it. "How kind, your Grace, but truly she is not fit for company. Even a brief visit might—" "Nonsense," Aunt Tabitha said. "A visit from a duke is medicinal. Best thing for a nervous girl. Nathaniel, I shall accompany you." He had not planned this. He had not expected Tabitha to insert herself. But he recognized the value of it instantly. A chaperone, a witness, and a woman whose social authority in this house exceeded Lady Sedgwick's by a considerable margin. Lady Sedgwick could refuse a duke's polite interest. She could not refuse the duke's aunt in the duke's uncle's house without exposing the refusal for what it was. The calculation played out behind Ruth's eyes. Nathaniel watched it. She was measuring distances, testing options, and finding none. "Of course," she said. "I will have Hannah prepare her. Perhaps tomorrow when she has had time to—" "Now, I think," Tabitha said. She was already rising. "No sense in fuss. The girl is either well enough to say hello or she isn't, and if she isn't, we shall know soon enough." Lady Sedgwick stood. Something had hardened in her face. Not anger, not fear, but the expression of a woman whose careful architecture was being subjected to a weight it was not designed to bear. She smoothed her skirt, smiled. "Shall I lead the way?" They climbed. Lady Sedgwick first, then Tabitha, then Nathaniel. The stairs narrowed as he had expected. The wallpaper, handsome on the lower floors, gave way to bare plaster. The carpet thinned to runner, then to bare wood. The house was shedding its pretensions as they ascended, revealing its bones, and the bones were cold. At the top, the plain door. Lady Sedgwick produced a key from the chatelaine at her waist. Not hidden. Worn openly, as though locking an attic room were the most natural domestic act in the world. The key turned. The door opened. Nathaniel did not know what he had expected. Squalor, perhaps. Melodramatic deprivation. Chains, darkness, something that would make the injustice legible in the visual grammar of outrage. What he found was worse because it was ordinary. A small room, clean. A narrow bed, neatly made, a washstand, a single chair beside a window that faced north. The walls were bare except where damp had left its signature in faint brownish clouds. There was a shelf with 3 books and a candle stub. There was a spider's web in the corner, occupied and undisturbed. And there was the girl. She stood by the window, turned toward them, and Nathaniel understood that she had heard them coming, had heard every footstep on the stairs, had parsed the sounds the way she parsed the rhythm of dinner conversation through the floorboards. She had known, and she had stood, and she had composed herself. She was thin. That was the first thing, because it was the thing that could not be concealed by the plain dress she wore, which hung from her shoulders as though borrowed from a larger woman. Her hair was dark and pinned without art. Her hands were clasped before her, knuckles white, and when her eyes met Nathaniel's, he felt the impact in his spine. They were gray, steady, completely, terribly awake. "Abigail," Lady Sedgwick said, her voice warm, motherly, pitched for the audience behind her. "You have visitors, darling. His Grace, the Duke of Halford, and Lady Tabitha." The girl, Abigail, curtsied. The movement was careful, as though she were remembering how. "Your Grace, my lady." Her voice was low, rough at the edges, the way a voice becomes when it is used rarely. "My dear girl," Tabitha said, and there was something in Tabitha's voice that Nathaniel had not heard before, a fracture in the imperial certainty, a softening that was not performance. His aunt was looking at the room, at the candle stub, at the shelf with its 3 books, at the bed, narrow as a coffin. Nathaniel looked at Abigail. She looked back at him, and in her gaze he saw neither plea nor expectation. She was studying him with the same precise, unsentimental attention that filled her letters, observing him the way she observed the cracked slate, the spider, the silence. She was not hoping. She had passed beyond hoping into something more durable and more desolate. "I have decided he is kind because I need him to be." He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his adult life, the Duke of Halford could not find words adequate to the moment. "Miss Sedgwick," he said at last. His voice was steady because he forced it to be. "I trust you are comfortable." The question was absurd, and he knew it. The room answered it. But he needed to hear her speak again, needed to see whether she would lie or remain silent or do something else entirely. She did something else entirely. She smiled. It was a small thing, barely a movement, and it contained no happiness. It contained recognition. She knew the question was absurd. She knew that he knew. And the smile said, "I see that you see." "Quite comfortable, Your Grace. Thank you." Lady Sedgwick's hand was on the doorframe. Her knuckles, Nathaniel noticed, had gone as white as Abigail's. "We should not tire her," Ruth said. "No," Nathaniel agreed. He held Abigail's gaze one moment longer. In that moment, he made a promise he did not speak. He was not certain she received it. He was not certain it was his to make. But he made it. They descended. The door locked behind them. The key returned to Lady Sedgwick's waist, and Nathaniel walked down the narrowing stairs into the broader, warmer, better-lit portions of the house, carrying with him the image of gray eyes that had stopped hoping, and the impossible, inadmissible, completely ungovernable feeling that something in that room had recognized something in him, and that the recognition had changed the shape of both. 3 days remained before the ball. Nathaniel spent them in a state of controlled combustion, outwardly composed, inwardly dismantling and rebuilding every possible course of action with the obsessive precision of a chess player who has seen the board and cannot unsee it. He walked the grounds. He sat through meals. He endured Aunt Tabitha's commentary on the weather, the wine, the inadequacy of modern young men. He played cards with Ezra and lost, which required genuine effort, because Ezra played cards the way he danced, earnestly and without instinct. And every morning, he checked the garden wall. On the 2nd day, he found a 4th letter. It had been placed in a new spot, farther along the wall, behind a stone that wobbled when touched. He read it standing among the bare rose bushes, his back to the house. He came. The tall man. He is real. And he came to my room, and he asked me if I was comfortable, and the question was so perfectly, beautifully wrong that I wanted to laugh. I did not laugh. I smiled, which is what one does when laughter would be misunderstood. He has dark eyes. I could not see their color clearly. The light here is poor, and he stood near the door. But they were dark, and they stayed on me. People do not stay on me. They glance and slide away, the way one's gaze slides from a stain on a tablecloth. He did not slide. He stayed. Nathaniel's breath left him in a way that was audible and involuntary. He pressed the letter flat against his thigh. "I will not make him into more than he is. I have spent too long inventing people through floorboards to trust the versions I create. He may be kind, or he may be curious, or he may be merely polite, and I cannot distinguish between these because I have been here so long that ordinary human attention feels like sunlight after a cellar, and I am blinded by it, and what blinds cannot be trusted to illuminate. She was right to distrust him, not his intentions. Those were solid, forged now into something harder than intention, something closer to covenant. But she was right that his attention was not ordinary. It had not been ordinary since the first letter pressed itself against his boot. What had begun as curiosity had deepened through compassion into territory he had no map for, and a man without a map is a man who can lead someone astray as easily as toward safety. He needed to be worthy of what he was about to do. That evening he wrote 2 letters of his own. The first was to his solicitor in London, requesting an urgent inquiry into the estate of the late Sir Adam Sedgwick, specifically the provisions made for his daughter Abigail in his will, and the identity of her legal guardian. The second was to a magistrate he knew in the county, a man named Tobias Hale, whose discretion and authority were both reliable. He sent both by express. Then he went to find Mrs. Gibbons. She was in the linen closet, counting napkins. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been expecting a reckoning, and was almost relieved it had arrived. "The maid," he said. "Hannah. She has been carrying letters." It was not a question. Mrs. Gibbons set down her inventory. "She has, Your Grace. Miss Abigail writes them and leaves them under her door. The gap is just wide enough, and Hannah collects them and places them in the wall. Miss Abigail asked her to post them, but Hannah cannot read and did not know there was no address. She simply hid them. She thought someone would find them eventually." "Someone did." "Yes, Your Grace." "How long has the girl been confined?" Mrs. Gibbons's hands found each other, gripped. "Since Lady Sedgwick took residence here, Your Grace, near on 2 years. At first she was merely restricted, kept from company, told she was in mourning. Then the room was locked. Then the key stayed with her ladyship." "And no one intervened?" The words were not accusatory. He made certain of that, but Mrs. Gibbons flinched as though they were. "She is the girl's stepmother, Your Grace. She has the authority. And who would we appeal to? The rector dines with Lady Sedgwick every month. The physician signs whatever she puts before him. The neighbors know only what she tells them." She paused, swallowed. "We are servants. We serve, and I am ashamed of it, Your Grace, but shame does not alter the mathematics." "No," he said, "it does not." He left her, walked the corridor, stopped at the foot of the east staircase, and looked upward, as he had before, at the plain door at the top. Then he climbed. He did not knock. He sat on the top step, on the bare wood, his back against the wall, and he spoke through the door. "Miss Sedgwick." Silence. Then a sound, the creak of a floorboard. That particular creak, the one she had described in her first letter. The sound of loneliness. Except this time, someone was coming. "Your Grace?" Her voice was muffled. Close. She was standing just inside. "I have read your letters." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, packed with implication, with exposure, with the particular vulnerability of a person whose private interior has been entered without permission. "Which ones?" she said finally. 4. Found in the garden wall and at the posting inn at Tenham Cross. A sound that might have been a laugh. Short, airless. "Hannah." "She did her best." "She did." Another pause. "You should not have read them." "No. They were not written for you. They were written for no one. I am told that is different." This time the sound was definitely a laugh. Quiet and incredulous, as though laughter were a language she was relearning. "Miss Sedgwick, Abigail." He used her name without thinking, and the familiarity startled him more than it should have. "I am going to help you. I need you to understand that this is not a thing I am considering. It is a thing that is going to happen. But I need you to tell me what you want, not what I think you need. What you want. The floorboard creaked again. He imagined her shifting her weight, leaning closer to the door or pulling away. He could not tell which. "I want to come downstairs," she said. Her voice was very steady. "I want to walk through the front door. I want people to see me. Not because they have been brought to my room as visitors to an exhibit, but because I am standing among them and they cannot look away." He closed his eyes, pressed the back of his head against the wall. "The ball," he said. "Yes. Your stepmother will not permit it." "No." "Then she will have to be unable to prevent it." Silence. Then, "You are talking about a scandal, Your Grace." "I am talking about a door opening. Whether it becomes a scandal depends on who is watching and what they are willing to see." He heard her breathing. Slow, measured. The breathing of a woman who had rationed candles and counted slates and kept a spider for company, who had burned away everything that was not essential and was left with a core of something so compressed and luminous that it could not be extinguished by 2 years of darkness or 100. "I am afraid," she said. "I know." "Not of her, of being seen. I have imagined it so many times that the imagining has become more real than the thing itself, and I am afraid that the real thing will be less than what I have invented, and I will have lost my best version of it." He pressed his palm flat against the door, wood and silence between them. "It will be less than what you have imagined. It will be imperfect and frightening and probably very badly managed, because I am better at strategy than execution. But it will be real, and real is the thing you have been writing toward. Every letter, every word, you are writing yourself into existence. Let me help you arrive." She said nothing for a long time. Then she pressed her palm against her side of the door. He could not see it. He could not feel it. But he knew, with the irrational certainty that belongs to moments that reshape a life, that her hand was there, mirroring his, separated by 2 inches of oak. "Tuesday," she said. "The ball is Tuesday." "Yes." "I will need a dress." He almost smiled. "I will speak to Mrs. Gibbons." "Your Grace." "Yes." "Nathaniel." She said his name the way she wrote, carefully, with a slight forward lean, as though testing whether the ground would hold. "Thank you for reading them. The letters. I know you should not have. I know it was a violation of everything. But they were for no one, and no one never answered, and you did." He sat on the top step with his hand against her door and his chest so full of something unnamed that breathing required conscious effort. Then he stood and went downstairs and began to prepare. Tuesday arrived. The ball at Brindley Park drew the county's respectable families and several who aspired to the designation. Carriages lined the drive. Candles filled every window. The musicians, imported from Bath at unnecessary expense, played from the gallery above the ballroom, where flowers had been arranged with military precision under Aunt Tabitha's personal command. Lady Sedgwick descended the main staircase at 8:30, flanked by Leah and Dinah, all 3 of them dressed in pale silk that caught the light identically, a triptych of coordinated beauty. She surveyed the ballroom with the calm of a woman who had accounted for every variable. She had not accounted for Mrs. Gibbons. At 9 o'clock, Nathaniel stood near the entrance to the ballroom and watched the crowd. He had dressed with more care than usual. Jessup, sensing the significance through whatever mysterious channel valets used, had outdone himself. The dark coat sat precisely. The cravat was architectural. Nathaniel felt armored and hated the feeling, because armor implied battle. And what was about to happen should not need to be a battle. It should be the simplest thing in the world. A woman walking into a room. He had spent 2 days in meticulous preparation. Mrs. Gibbons had found a dress, not new, but altered with the ferocious skill of a woman atoning for 2 years of complicity. The blue silk had belonged to a guest who had left it behind a decade ago. It had been taken in, hemmed, pressed. He had not seen it. He had not seen Abigail since the conversation through the door. But Hannah, who could not read but could conspire with intuitive brilliance, had carried messages in both directions. Instructions, reassurances, the careful choreography of what was to come. The reply from his solicitor had arrived that morning. Sir Adam Sedgwick's will named Abigail as primary heir to the estate, with Lady Sedgwick appointed guardian until Abigail's 21st birthday, at which point control of the inheritance transferred entirely. Abigail was 20, less than a year from the age at which her stepmother's authority and access to the estate's income would dissolve. The mathematics were brutal and clear. Lady Sedgwick had not locked Abigail away out of cruelty alone. She had locked her away to prevent the girl from reaching majority with the social connections, the legal awareness, and the will to claim what was hers. Isolation was not punishment. It was strategy. Nathaniel adjusted his cuff. Watched the clock. 9:15. Tobias Hale, the magistrate, had arrived at 8 and was positioned near the refreshment table, looking uncomfortable in evening dress and entirely alert. Aunt Tabitha, who had been told only that the evening would contain a development she would wish to witness, was stationed near the main doors with the anticipatory stillness of a cat watching a mouse hole. Ezra appeared at Nathaniel's elbow, clerical collar exchanged for a cravat that appeared to be slowly strangling him. "Is something happening?" "Possibly." "You have that look." "What look?" "The look you had at Cambridge before you presented your thesis on land reform. Very calm, slightly terrifying." "Go and ask Lady Sedgwick's elder daughter to dance." Ezra blinked. "Which one is the elder?" "Leah, dark hair, standing by the pillar." "They both have dark hair." "The one by the pillar, Ezra." Ezra went. Nathaniel watched him cross the room, watched Leah's expression shift from blankness to confusion to cautious interest as the clergyman bowed and extended his hand. They moved on to the floor. Lady Sedgwick watched them with maternal calculation, briefly absorbed. 9:22. The side door opened. Not the main entrance, the smaller door that connected the ballroom to the east corridor, rarely used, unobserved by most of the company. She came through it the way light enters a room when a curtain is drawn. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but with a quality of change that makes everything before it seem dimmer by comparison. The blue silk fit her. That was the first thing Nathaniel saw, and it should not have mattered, but it did, because it meant she had a shape that was not the shapelessness of deprivation, that beneath the plain dress and the narrowness of the attic she had a form that belonged in a room like this. Her hair had been arranged, Hannah's work, he guessed, imperfect but earnest, dark curls pinned and one escaping already at her temple. Her hands were bare, she wore no jewelry, she carried nothing. She stood just inside the door and looked at the room, and the room had not yet looked at her. Nathaniel crossed the floor. The crowd parted for him automatically, as crowds do for dukes, an unconscious deference that he usually found distasteful, and tonight found useful. He reached her in 8 strides. She watched him come. Her gray eyes were wide and absolutely steady, and he could see the fear in them, and he could see the thing behind the fear that was not courage exactly, but was the quality she had described in the cracked slate. Persistence. The refusal to worsen or heal, simply to endure until endurance became something else. He stopped before her. The room was beginning to notice. Conversations faltered, then resumed, then faltered again. A duke crossing a ballroom with purpose was a spectacle that commanded attention the way a ship commands the harbor it enters. "Miss Sedgwick." He bowed, straightened, held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Her lips parted. For a moment she looked at his hand as though it were an object from a foreign country, recognizable in theory, astonishing in practice. Then she placed her fingers on his, and the touch ran through him like a note struck on a piano in an empty hall, resonant and singular and impossible to ignore. "You may, Your Grace." He led her onto the floor. The musicians, attentive to the movement of the room's most important person, shifted into a waltz. Nathaniel placed his hand at her waist. She was trembling. He could feel it through the silk, a fine, continuous vibration, and he thought of the birds in the covered cage, and the cloth being lifted, and the bewildering, devastating flood of real light. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I am breathing." "Breathe slower." She almost smiled. "You are very commanding." "I am told it is a deficiency." "By whom?" "Everyone I have ever met." She did smile then, small, real, and they danced. Across the room, Lady Sedgwick turned from watching Leah and Ezra and saw them. Nathaniel watched it happen. Watched the color leave Ruth's face in a downward sweep, like water receding from a shore. Watched her eyes move from Abigail to Nathaniel to the roomful of witnesses, the county families, the magistrate, Aunt Tabitha, and watched her understand in a single visible instant that the architecture of 2 years had collapsed. She took a step forward, stopped. Her elder daughter was dancing with a clergyman. Her younger daughter was watching the Duke waltz with the girl who did not exist. The room was watching. Everyone was watching. And Lady Sedgwick could not cross that floor and reclaim her stepdaughter without declaring publicly that the girl she had told the world was ill, absent, fragile, fictive, was in fact alive and present and dancing in blue silk with the highest-ranking man in the room. To intervene was to confess. To remain still was to lose. She remained still. Her hands, for the first time in Nathaniel's observation, were not steady. "She is watching," Abigail said. She did not look at her stepmother. She looked at Nathaniel. "Yes?" "What happens now?" "Now," Nathaniel said, "you are in a room full of people who can see you, and tomorrow Magistrate Hale will begin an inquiry into your guardianship, and your stepmother's physician will be questioned, and your father's will shall be enforced." The waltz turned them. Candlelight moved across Abigail's face, and she was not beautiful in the way the word was commonly used. She was too thin, too sharp, too marked by what had been done to her. But her eyes held his with a directness that made beauty beside the point, a secondary consideration, a language too imprecise for what was being communicated. "You did this," she said. "You wrote the letters. I merely read them." "No one reads letters addressed to no one." "I did." The music swelled. He drew her closer than propriety strictly allowed. She let him. Her trembling had not stopped, but it had changed. Less fear now, more something else, something seismic and internal, the tremor of a structure bearing weight it was designed for but had never been tested against. "I counted the slates," he said. "On the opposite roof, there are 143. Her breath caught. "You counted them." "I did not need to. You had already told me. But I wanted to see what you saw, from where you saw it." The waltz ended. The room exhaled. And into the silence before the next dance, before conversation resumed, and the evening reassembled itself around this new, irrevocable fact, Abigail Sedgwick stood in the middle of a ballroom full of people who could see her, and she did not disappear. Aunt Tabitha materialized at Nathaniel's elbow with the inevitability of weather. She looked at Abigail, looked at Nathaniel, looked across the room at Lady Sedgwick, who stood motionless by the pillar her daughter had vacated. Alone now, visibly alone, the symmetry of her careful life broken. "Well," Tabitha said, "I see." She took Abigail's hand, tucked it into the crook of her arm, and walked her, slowly, deliberately, past every watching face in the room, toward the refreshment table where Magistrate Hale was already setting down his glass. Nathaniel stood where they had danced. The floor was empty around him. He could still feel the pressure of her fingers on his hand, the tremor through the silk, the moment when her smile had surfaced. Not invented, not imagined through a floorboard, but real and directed at him, and containing within it the entire compressed force of a woman who had written herself into existence one letter at a time and had finally arrived. Lady Sedgwick left Brindley Park before midnight. She took her daughters. She did not take her stepdaughter. The carriage pulled away in darkness, and Nathaniel watched it go from the window of the east corridor, standing in the exact spot where, if he looked up, he could see the attic window. Dark now, empty now. Behind him the ball continued. Music, laughter, the sound rising through the boards. In his breast pocket, 4 letters. Addressed to no one, answered by someone. He would write to her tomorrow, a proper letter, with her name on it and his and a direction and all the ordinary apparatus of correspondence between two people who existed in the same world and knew it. But tonight he simply stood and breathed and let the feeling settle. Not resolution, not yet, but the first true silence after a long cacophony. The silence that follows, not the absence of sound, but the end of the need to listen through floorboards. The silence of a door, finally, standing open.